Today we are endeavouring to complete the Mega Stompa that we built for our Necrork's army at the beginning of Orktober. And to do this we are not only going to be going over how we painted the model, as well as the theory behind why we painted certain aspects of the model, but we're also going to be doing a very intensive weathering job. So let's jump in. To kick this off, naturally we need to spray the model. And normally I don't have a setup to film us spraying a model, and I still don't. But I am going to describe how we did it because it's unlike normal. What we did is we took a couple of different sprays. We took a metally goldy bronze as well as a silver, both from the Games Workshop line. Then we applied it in a couple of ways. First we gave an all-over coat of the gold, followed by a zenithal application of the silver. This gives us an overall area where the base coat has got a nice dark gold tone, while the edges and the brighter upward facing surfaces are silver. That gives us a neutral base. Then what we can do is come in with the pure gold and the pure silver and apply these over set areas. So we took a couple of panels on the front and sprayed that purely with gold. And what that will do is give us a nice variance of gold, silver and worn silvery tarnished gold for our base coat to work from. With our primer applied, let's start the hands-on work. For this, we are going to first need to grab a dark bronze or similar dark brown metal, as well as a sponge or piece of foam. By making sure that our sponge is not drenched in paint, we can then press the sponge lightly, firmly, and randomly against the panels of the Stompa, depositing a random spread of this dark bronze metallic. This will need to be repeated, and we are going to be grabbing a fresh bit of foam or sponge, and then this time we are going to be doing a very similar process, working round and applying a bright silver. Similar to the bronze, as you would expect, this will leave a light spread of silver across the model, representing some wear and tear. Now, that is an excellent start for building up the paint layers on our model. However, there is one thing worth highlighting. All of the Necron components that are across our Stompa are not going to be weathered in the same way as the Ork parts that are on there. The idea being that the Necron technology is more resistant, and that's why it's sought after by the Necrorks. Whereas by making everything else look rusty and the Necron area being clean, we're able to sell that effect. So that's why you'll notice that the special effects that we're going through and applying aren't really touching any of the Necron stuff. With that all said, we are going to be jumping into another little bit of pre-weathering. And to do this, what we're going to do is grab some oil thinner and some oil paints and build up a nice oil wash. We will be making up a large amount of this oil wash into a small cup. And the oil wash will be heavily applied across all of the areas on the model that we are going to want to weather. This is going to be a massive change to the look of the model. Essentially, we're going to be turning everything into a dark navy mess. But once we've gone round and we've happily applied all of the oil wash, we can give it a small amount of time. Here we waited roughly 20 minutes after we'd gone round and applied everything. Then with a low fibre rag, we can go round and wipe off the majority of the wash that we've just applied. On this particular removal job, we want to make sure that the cloth we're using has pretty much no fibres because we don't want any loose hairs on our model. But also we want to make sure that we're using a dry cloth. Normally you could go through and do this with a cloth with thinners attached. And the disadvantage for us there is it will remove majority of it, leaving the panels pretty much clean. What we want is by using a dry cloth is to give us a scratchy, non-guaranteed outcome. So what we will do is end up pulling majority off. But by using a dry cloth, it's going to leave a lot more of that oil paint and colouring effect all on the model. Once the wash has been pulled off, we can then grab a silver because we are going to naturally need to touch up any of the Necron areas, giving these a nice silver tone. This is to cover up the inevitable overspill on all of the earlier steps. Optionally, we can also use this silver to give a complete coat to some of the Ork panels. This will help to sell the idea that some panels are slightly newer. We can then turn to colouring some of the other panels. Naturally, we need to keep our patchy and warm theme as we go. Now, there's another point here where I should probably jump in. We did not apply any varnish on this model up till this point. Currently, it is still fresh from the oil. The oil wash at this point has had about a day or so to dry, so it's nearly touch dry, but we haven't varnished to lock it all in. And that's actually intentional on how we're doing and applying these next layers of paint. What we're going to try and do is utilize the slick oil effect to help us get a inconsistent, patchy, worn paint effect. I'm sure we've all had it before where we've tried to paint a unprimed model or something similar very quickly, and as soon as we apply the paint, it all beads up and pours off. That will happen if we are going onto a panel that has got oil residue. And rather than varnishing or wiping it off and trying to make sure it's perfect, we're going to lean into that, hoping that that separation and spreading will sell our nice, worn, textured colouring. I only highlight that because if you don't want to struggle in the same way we did or use the same effect, it's worth varnishing your model first. But jumping back to the painting, we can add some of the panel sections. This process essentially was the same for near enough all colours, the main difference being the colour of choice and process of application. For our reds, we first took a dark red and then applied a thin coat of this across all of the panels that we wanted. This will dry patchy and separated due to the oil residue, meaning that all we need to do is apply one quick layer and then move on. The yellow areas were based in a light beige to start with, and we also opted to stipple these on as opposed to applying a clean layer, adding a little bit more chaos to the area. With the placements mapped out, we can turn to the highlighting. For the yellow, this came in the form of a thinned yellow layer applied over the top of our stippled base, giving us that clear yellow tone. On the other hand, for our reds, we do the inverse. Taking a lighter red, we will work round and apply this as a stipple across our past layers. This will give our two main areas a punch of brightness from the later layers, and we can see how it spreads out across the model and where the colours are placed. Personally, I think that having this nice split method works quite well. On one side, we've got an effect that is stippled and then layered over the top, versus one that is layered and then stippled. We get very close to the same outcome, a scratchy, worn effect, but they are applied in different manners, giving us a different look and style to them. The other benefit that we've got and what we came in and did off camera is now is the perfect time to come in and paint any panels that we want black. And the advantage of this is black is a subtle colour that will stay out of view and won't draw attention. So we can use it to break up any overly metal areas without putting yellow or red there, which will draw attention to it. Also, orcs naturally like black and white patchwork and things like that, so you can take the opportunity to add a bit of that flair in as well. This is the last stage before we properly start weathering. And what we're going to be doing here is painting in the blue Necron energy that is being harvested by the Necrorks to power this creation. This can be achieved by first taking a dark blue and then using this to cover all of the areas that we want blue. We need to make sure that we have a good base coat of this colour. We can then come in with a lighter blue and follow up on our blue base, applying a very heavy overbrush. This is going to pick out all of the raised areas, allowing some variation, because what we're going to do now is make up a blue wash and apply this across the blue areas. We did this in a thinned blue contrast, and what this will do is help to ensure that all of the areas that we want blue are completely blue with a little bit of variation that we can then boost later on. Now is the point where we applied a varnish. We used a satin varnish from Army Painter via a spray can to apply over the model. The reason for that is that while the past work will be dry and touch dry, what we're about to do now is some more intense weathering using some more harsh chemicals and paints. And we don't want this reacting with any of our past work. So by going around and giving the surface a couple of coats of a clean varnish, what we're able to do is add a little bit of protective surface between our previously applied work, as well as all of these new effects that we're going to be painting on in a moment. This first step, however, isn't too powerful and is nice and simple, coming in the form of an all-over light silver dry brush. We can work around the model using a very large makeup brush to quickly pick out most of the raised edges, giving us a light chipping effect. From there, we can start the weathering in earnest. And we are going to start the process with an application of oil. Here we are going to be using an oil brusher from the MIG range. And overall, these work really well for quick, localized applications. We applied a dab to most of the rivets, and then quickly after that application, coming in with a finger or a cloth, we can wipe downwards, which will leave streaks from where we've applied it, which would be the rivets. Doing this in 2 different colors gives us a little bit of variety of rust and weathering on these smaller areas. Next, we are going to move on to the grimes, starting with the streaking grime. This is a streaking effect paint from MIG, and similar to the oil brushes, we have a few options of these styles of paints. First, we are going to be using a brown rust streaking effect, and this can be applied heavily across the model. Mainly, we are going to be aiming to hit joints and edges of where sections of metal meet, applying it heavily enough that it will run down across the panels. Then we can come in and build up the mossy, slimy dirt effect by using a dark and light green slime tone. This was applied slightly differently to the rust. Here we were focusing on all of the flat, upward facing surfaces, and this is to show that slow build up of dirt, filth and mould. We actually used the dark tone first and then came in with the lighter option, laying this on top, giving us a little bit of variance and change in these areas. We are now most of the way there. We've applied a fair few different types of weathering effects, and it looks really good. The main issue that we've got at the moment is we haven't applied any actual texture. All of the things we've done so far are pretty much applying either oil washes, enamel washes, or simple acrylic washes. And they add colour, they add effect, but they don't add texture. What we're going to do now is go for some fun effects paints that will exactly do the opposite and give us some texture. First, we are going to be digging out some of the fun effects in the form of Dirty Down Rust and Dirty Down Verdigris. This was applied in a couple of applications, but in all honesty, you could probably have skipped the first one that we're going to go over. We applied first a layer of the rust, followed by a layer of the verdigris. My understanding is that generally, the model, as well as the ambient temperature, should be relatively warm when using this product, because the temperature is what drives the effect. In this case, it wasn't warm, it was relatively cool, and the effect didn't take any impact or change, meaning we were left with mostly just a brown goop spread over our model. However, we were able to make this work to our advantage by coming round and applying a second layer of the same effects, this time applying heat via the application of a hairdryer, causing a reaction and giving us this nice layered rusting effect where we have the darker, thick goop beneath and then the lighter rusting effect on top. We then came round and finished off the weathering with an application of U-Rust. This can be applied like a texture paint, and it has very small, what I believe to be metal flakes and metal shards. When applied and left to dry normally, these come out as a dark grey, slightly brown looking effect. However, with the application of some activator, the effect starts to change in earnest. We took this paint and then worked around the model, applying it in the sections similar to before where panels join or water could pool or run. Once the U-Rust base was down, we then worked around applying a spread of activators across the areas that we applied the U-Rust. This turns the U-Rust into a red and orange, and any of the pooled activator that doesn't react conveniently looks like a lighter verdigris, so we can keep that as well. With all of the rust and all of the nice weathering effects down, then all it is the last finishing steps and any small tweaks you might want to do. So for example, here we still need to paint the odd red goblin faces that are sat on the inside of some of the panels. That's a nice, quick and easy job, and we can do that in not too much time after this video. We also need to go around and just touch up things like the blue energy. We did that with the same two coloured blues that we used before the contrast wash, blending between those two to get up to a brighter tone. The only bit that we didn't cover in this video, but is probably worth highlighting, is we used that central mesh across the model as a sort of Necron energy conduit. So while it was a mesh, we've then painted blue lightning strikes up to the Necron technology, hopefully selling that idea that the metal Ork frame is still able to pass that energy from one place to another, leading to the creation and protection of this Mega Stompa. Now, with all that set aside, let's have a look at how the Mega Stompa came out. Here is hopefully some videos and photos of said Stompa, with all of our Necrorks attached. There is one thing that we were hoping to do for this model that we didn't get the opportunity to so far, but we might get to it in the future. And that was we were going to have a weird boy in a Necrork scheme in the center chamber of our Mega Stompa. And that is essentially to represent the similar effect of a Satan being trapped inside an obelisk. We never got round to that stage. We do have it built, we are ready to get it painted, and hopefully it will make its way into the Mega Stompa in not too long. But until then, maybe you missed how we built our Mega Stompa out of a couple of kits of Stompas and an obelisk. And if that is the case, you need to check out this video here. Otherwise, you're going to need to remember to subscribe so that we can see you next time.